with all of that said, we have really entered like the next console war, which is the handheld wars. What's good, everyone? Ninja Viaduct back at it again. I'm your host, Andrew, and joining me tonight, I have Chris. Our third, Raymond, is out for the evening, but fear not, he will return at some point soon. But for this week, there's kind of just a lot of news in gaming, so we wanted to do another episode of just a news roundup and talk story a bit. But before all of that, it has been a minute since Chris and I chatted, so we also wanted to catch up a bit. So what's going on with you, Chris? What's new?
Yeah, I mean, for me this week, probably the biggest highlight for me was on Friday. I watched Gladiator 2. So great movie, definitely liked it. Was a big fan of the first one. Watched it many times. Even recently watched just leading up to Gladiator 2. I found out there was a extended edition that was like already about 3 hours long. Great movie. Watching the extended edition reminded me as to why I really like Gladiator, and so going into Gladiator 2, had a lot of expectations that I would be entertained. Not that I was expecting any kind of historical accuracy in this film, but definitely just great fun and action, and some well placed acting, and I definitely was not disappointed. I do like how they, to avoid spoilers, I do like how they wrote the story to connect it from the first one into the second one, and what kind of started trying to build with the whole political intrigue and some of the moral aspects, and a lot of the different characters where I thought were all well written. So it's definitely very good. And then if you watch Gladiator 1, you definitely can go into Gladiator 2 and expect what you're going to expect. But if anything, the fights are much more creative. That said, when I did finish Gladiator 2, as much as I enjoyed it, I definitely felt that Gladiator 1 was still the better film. I think primarily because it felt a lot more of a focus on one character, which was Russell Crowe's character Maximus, right? Whereas in Gladiator 2, you had a lot of like different focus on different characters, which wasn't really bad. It's just ultimately, definitely to me, didn't feel like didn't beat Gladiator 1. But I still enjoyed it both. If you haven't watched it, or if any of you haven't watched it out yet, definitely recommend to watch it on the big screen that you can possible, whether it's IMAX or any other large format screen. Highly recommend it. But on the topic of a film, there was one piece of news that I found very interesting, which I didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize. I knew was the Highlander movie, right? So I definitely heard off the cuff that there was a remake, or maybe not a remake, I'm not too sure, of this movie. And I've never watched the Highlander movies other than bits and pieces. I've never watched the TV show other than bits and pieces. But I think what is getting me quite excited for this movie is the fact that you have two well-known people on this film, which is Chad Stahelski. So we know who he is, being the former stunt actor for Keanu Reeves in Matrix, and also director for the John Wick films. And then you have Henry Cavill, right? So Superman, The Witcher, and the fact that you have this Highlander movie, which we know is about swords. And I've watched The Witcher, and seeing Henry Cavill fight with swords, I'm pretty excited as to what they're gonna make with this upcoming Highlander film. I mean, you have Chad Stahelski doing coordinating, directing with the action. You have Henry Cavill, who could probably definitely execute the action, and with really strong man ish kind of feel. Um, I'm looking forward to it. I don't know much background about Highlander other than like you cut someone else's head off, and then you get like the whole electrified, like I am the one kind of moment.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, I'm looking forward to that. So I'm very curious. That's probably this week's news that really caught my attention for that.
Yeah, I remember watching some of it as a kid. There was like one movie that had like Donnie Yen in it, and I think I watched that one. I had absolutely no clue what was going on in that movie, but I was like, cool action at the time. But the the other guy that you mentioned, who's attached to the project. Was that the guy that was also in the most recent like John Wick films? Like he played a character as well. He was like
Ah,
um, I don't know his character's name, but he had like a big bodysuit and he had like silver teeth or something.
oh
Was it
yeah,
that guy?
yeah, yeah. No, he's not the director, but I think he was, from what I read, like a professional MMA fighter.
Mm.
And but yeah, I remember. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, his character was really interesting. I think he did pull a really good act for his character. But no, that's definitely not him. Although if he is in the movie for Highlander, I'd be pretty stoked about that too. So it'd be interesting to see what, maybe he's in another big fat suit. I don't know, but he can definitely move in that big suit. That's for sure. So
All right. Well,
yeah.
uh, anything else to report for this week since the last time we spoke?
Well, this if there's anything else that I want to talk about, it's more of an observation. I mean, I was in the shopping mall not too long ago, and I walked into the electronics center area, and I noticed that there was a large stock of PS5 Pros. I know before we talked about PS5 Pros about whether or not they are going to sell a lot, or if they are people that just in general are interested in buying a PS5 Pro. And when I walked into this shopping mall, and I saw a large stack of supposedly limited batches of PS5 Pros, even though there was certainly a tower of PS5 Pros in front of me. It just reminded me of the news and our question about whether or not it's this PS5 Pro is a popular item for consumers like us. And seeing that, I just thought, it definitely does not seem to be it. Not that it's not a impressive technical piece of hardware, but it definitely doesn't seem to be selling like hotcakes, like I'm sure probably Sony would expect it to be. And then what was funny to me was that when I saw the stack of PS5 Pros, like they literally had it stacked as like a pyramid. Right next to it was another pyramid of base PS5 disc and non-disc
Mm-hmm.
versions for less than $400. Like, the whole Black Friday sale, right? So they're discounting them like $50 off. So we have a mountain of PS5 Pros that are like under $400 versus a sorry, when you have a mountain of PS5 base under $400 compared sitting next to a PS5 Pro mountain of like that's hitting $700. Like, it's 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 a hard buy when you compare like that, right? And to be honest, I'm not too sure why they kind of stack the PS5s like that. When you see the prices like that, oh, am I going to pay $700 versus something that's less than $400? Most people are probably going to be grounded to the cheap one, unless they are well versed into what the difference is with the PS5 Pro, which I argue the majority of people that play games, mass market, is probably not that
Mm-hmm.
high enthusiasts for a PS5 Pro, which then as I was walking from the mall, I just reminded me of another news article I read about Cyberpunk announcing that they would not make a patch to take advantage of the PS5 Pro's power, which to me it makes sense because Cyberpunk was a really expensive game to make. They
Mm-hmm.
had they that game took so long to make. I'm sure they spent a lot of money on that. I don't know what the exact numbers are. And then when they had the whole fiasco with the launch, and I'm sure they spent a lot of money just just trying to fix Cyberpunk to get into the state it is now. So I definitely would understand the decision being that, what, we've already done a lot of changes for Cyberpunk, and are we going to spend time to patch the game just to take advantage of the PS5 Pro, which I'm guessing they probably didn't think a lot of people were going to buy it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense. So I wasn't really surprised that they announced that they would not make a PS5 Pro patch for Cyberpunk. Granted, not that I would have not liked to see that if I had a PS5 Pro, which I don't. But if I did, I definitely would have liked to have that patch, because Cyberpunk is a really great, beautiful game, and just to see the visuals on Cyberpunk, I would have liked to. I would have made the effort to replay it again. At least at least certain aspects of Cyberpunk. Maybe Phantom Liberty again, just to see those improved visuals. But it just ultimately reminded me of the fact that the question is PS5 Pro going to sell? Is it going to be popular? Is it going to be a hot item? Definitely seems not to be, and especially when you hear the news about people scalpers selling their PS5 Pros at a loss, I believe, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you know that's interesting things to see. Not too surprised though, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's actually a perfect segue into the main topic of our episode tonight, which is really just like a news roundup, which we've already sort of started dabbling into that. But one of the big things that caught my eye this week was a lot of the reporting on handheld systems. And, this isn't just for this current week. This really has been sort of building up over the past couple of weeks, and even just really this year. So, in in preparation for the show, I decided to kind of just do a quick little review of just like some of the articles that I've talked about some of the handhelds, and I really want to start earlier in this year, back in like May or April or so, where there was initial rumors for like a Microsoft handheld. At the time, they started to send out surveys to people and kind of started getting a better feel for like what do you look for in a handheld system or like a portable PC. I think is the exact verbiage that they use in their survey. How likely are you going to buy a portable PC, like handheld gaming PC, in the next like 3 to 5 years? And with that started to spike a bunch of different theories and rumors and stuff. But you know, Phil Spencer and like Microsoft, they're just like, no, we're just doing market research. And then not long after that, they officially announced like, yes, this is real. We are looking into it. And that report came, I believe, last week. So like mid last week, where they said like, yes, we're looking into it. It's going to be a few years out now, but really, what their sort of approach to it all is, I think, a very important one, because in sort of previous interviews that Phil Spencer has been doing over the past year, he's sort of been pressed time and time again about whether or not a handheld is in the works over at Xbox. And for the most part, he's always sort of like shied away from it, sort of alluded to it, but never has outright stated it until recently. But in one interview that he gave, he started asking some very important questions, I think, for gaming, which is what exactly is uh, how can we bring more players into just like gaming in general, and like the Xbox ecosystem, and where are the gamers now, right? And I think for the most part, a lot of us are doing the hustle and bustle, right? Where it's really hard for people to just be at home and playing games, unless you're like a youth, you have a lot of time on your hands. But most of us, who have grown up with games now, we're all working adults. There's a lot of commute times happening. Sometimes, it's we want to try to play in bed, but it's not like great to have, a standard Xbox or even a PlayStation system. And so going handheld is definitely more primed to that. And so I think, by asking those types of questions, that really has fueled the motivation for Xbox to develop the handheld moving forward, and also to really consider the needs of the consumers moving forward as well. But on top of that, it's not just Xbox, it's not just Microsoft, right? Sony recently announced like a patch for their PlayStation Portal this week, and it's going to now utilize like their cloud technology, and so people can now stream through the PlayStation Portal even if you don't have a PS5 anymore. Now that I think what was mentioned in the article was that it's limited to only certain people with like premium PlayStation Plus access. It's still in beta mode, but with what they're running with the beta right now, it was like access to like 120 games, and a lot of them were like first party software. So like Ghost of Tsushima, the Spider-Man series, things like that, right? And so they're pretty serious about like you also answering that question about like where are players now, and then meeting them where they're at, which is on the move. Okay? And so with all of that said, this was all done while I was doing my initial research earlier today, but like literally breaking earlier tonight, Sony announced that they are in fact looking at a handheld once again, not just the PlayStation Portal, but building off of it, and seeing where that goes moving forward. What is going to be the true successor to the PS Vita, right? So I think with all of that said, we have really entered like the next console war, which is the handheld wars. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think this is a good time for them to even try too, because it's been a while since Nintendo Switch has had an update, and of course, there's the now known that it's gonna come Nintendo Switch 2 maybe sometime next year, but the trend has been that Nintendo has been starting to see a little bit downward slope in terms of their sales of the Nintendo Switch, whereas Sony, for example, PS5 has been going up in comparison to the trend, right? Not so much the hard numbers, but that just kind of suggests that you know people who have a Nintendo Switch are, to me, probably looking out for the next thing, something more novel, right? And you have we have Nintendo, and of course you can have those mainstay staples like Zelda, Mario Kart, Mario first party Mario games. Where and if Sony and Microsoft are now trying to seriously jump into this, they're probably anticipating that maybe Nintendo is at a slight down moment or there's like a slight advantage door opening for them to try to hop in and hopefully take some market share, right? I mean, you already have Sony's PlayStation Portal, and like you mentioned, that update where it allows them to utilize like the cloud gaming services, which I think is great. I've tinkered around with a little bit the PlayStation Portal myself a little bit, and I do have to admit that even though I don't know if I would personally play it, it does feel nice to have like that size screen in a PS5 controller grip, right? That you could take around with you. I mean, that does definitely feels really good. And Microsoft, they already have their service that's been around for like Xbox. Was it Xbox Live, right? Not Xbox Live.
Yeah, like
Game Pass. Game Pass. There
Game
you go.
Pass. Yeah.
Game Pass, right? So I think to me, I think if I had to be in the shoes of Sony, Microsoft, I think they sense that Nintendo probably was taking a bit too long to upgrade their Nintendo Switch 2, which I admit, which I agree. I mean, Nintendo has probably there's a lot of times where Nintendo could have just upgraded the Switch, like maybe last year, this year, because I remember seeing a lot of comments about, for example, Breath of the Wild, right? Being everyone loved the game, but you know what? It was choppy. It was a bit choppy. It was a bit, frame rate's a bit slow, that kind of stuff. So, you know, Sony, Microsoft can definitely do that, and you bring in handheld that can play like these, AAA games, for example, on a handheld, without so much of a power drop, then that's going to be to me very compelling, especially if they keep a competitive price point. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Definitely be interesting to see. I mean, even better if they're able to take these handhelds and be able to, one, not only be portable, but two, also make the footprint smaller, right? So you could take that handheld, you can go around with you to work, to on the train, on the bus, on the, in like an Uber, for example. And then when you want to play on a big screen, just connect it to your TV in some way, and boom, you have a full screen, you know, a game system that you can play when you're at home, when you're gonna go, unplug it, take it out, and you continue on as you go. So I definitely think you're on something about the handheld console war probably brewing.
Yeah, I think too. So it's going to be really interesting to see where everything's going to be in like the next 5 years or so. Just because I do think Nintendo hasn't necessarily been slow per se. Like, this is still within the like a reasonable console generation time frame, I think. But I do think with all the other major hitters considering entering the handheld space, I do think Nintendo should really be concerned now because one of the things that they had going for them for so long is that yes, our consoles are weaker, in terms of like power and capability, but our stuff works, right? And it's like all the first party stuff, it works. They're always reviewed very well, right? And for the most part, at least with the Switch, it has utilized like third party systems and like indie devs and things like that to kind of like build out their library there too. But I think now where the real threat is, and this ties back into our previous conversations with the PlayStation 5 Pro, is that we have sort of reached a plateau state of graphical capability and like what can run on systems, or like the development has sort of slowed down a little bit, and so with that slower pace, I do think this gives Sony X or Microsoft the opportunity to now be like, hey, we can now put some resources into just developing this in a handheld format and still run all the games that we want it to run, right? Or at least like a majority of things. Of course, you're going to have like the brand new newest releases kind of be a toss up. Sometimes it works, sometimes it'll be a little bit choppy. Hopefully, nothing is incredibly broken, right? But I do think this gives them a little bit more breathing room to now utilize some of those things. And, that was going back to what I was saying about Nintendo with their strength, right? You had a lot of guarantees with what they had, and for the most part, it was a little bit more forgiving that they had a weaker system because you could be portable with it, right? But now with things like the Steam Deck, Lenovo, and Asus, right? They they're starting to address these pitfalls with Nintendo, right? They were sort of the first wave, and with Sony, they've dabbled into this space before, although to fairly little success. That for a while we were kind of thinking like maybe Sony was done with it, but I am really intrigued with what Xbox is doing, right? Just because I mean now having a Steam Deck on hand, well, love Steam Deck, love what I can do, love the games I'm able to play. There are certain limitations to what I can do with that, and the results or the sort of the word escapes me right now, but the solution to those roadblocks and barriers is to boot up like Windows onto these things, and this would allow me to play different types of games out there. And now with Xbox and Microsoft developing their own handheld, well, now they can do all of those things. Plus, they already have their own market system with like their Xbox app, things like that. So it'll be really interesting. Plus, Game Pass as well. So it'll be really interesting to see the Microsoft handheld more specifically, like PlayStation and Sony. That's probably going to be cool, but I am curious to know whether or not they've learned the correct lessons from the PSP, PS Vita, and just like in general with console stuff overall. Um, but I think with new blood entering the field with Microsoft, that's where things are going to be really interesting.
Yeah, no, for sure. It definitely would be interesting to see how this turns out. For me personally, I've never been so much of a handheld person. But in the past, I did have a PS. The last portable handheld I've had was the PSP. Now I remember playing that quite a bit, but I could never shave off the feeling that I wanted something. I wanted the games I was playing the PSP onto the bigger screen, and especially for a portable game that didn't feel like they were held back via hardware, right? So for a customer like me, if I was to ever adopt a handheld again in the future, they would one, it would definitely need to feel comparable to a console system, right? And what I mean by that is, for example, when you play games on the PSP, for example, back then, right, when it was doing the PS2, PS3 era, PS4, you could tell that those games were designed to take advantage of, well, not take advantage, but to work within the confines of what the PSP could do at the time, right?
Mhm.
So and two, of course, also the screen size was small. I don't know it's because I'm getting older, or it's because I just have a preference, but I definitely do enjoy playing games that I really like on a bigger screen. So I do like what's happening with technology today. Definitely these handhelds today are much bigger and much more capable. So I'm looking forward to it. So definitely for me right now, it's hard for me to actually adopt a handheld, but I wouldn't be surprised if the improvements that go on and the changes they make, if they make it more, if they address those things for a customer like me, I definitely then could see myself getting a handheld in the future. But we'll never know. We'll see. We'll see. Coming soon.
Yeah, I think that's actually over the past like couple of years too. With PlayStation and Xbox, I have noticed quite a bit of effort going into accessibility concerns and like addressing those pain points when it comes to their consumers. And so I do think while still servicing that population of players, I think the lessons learned there could also be applied to the handheld space as well and being used to address some of those things like with hard to read text and like smaller text. Is there a way to like enhance that, make it a little bit more visible? What's that going to look like? Because I do think at a certain point there is going to be a size limitation as to how big these handheld screens are, right? Like at some point it's going to seem ridiculous if you're carrying around like a 12, 13-inch screen, similar to that of a laptop, and you just have like these two rinketing handles to it, right? So I do think there is going to be a limitation there, and so to solve that, you have to deal with the software side of things and you know asking these accessibility questions moving forward.
For sure.
So, but in any case, we'll see what the future has in store for the handheld wars. But what's what are some interesting articles that you saw this week in the world of gaming?
Yeah, some other headliners that I've noticed that got me curious was the announcement about Remedy revealing their required sales number they would need to make sure that they are able to break even, or to not break even, but to get 100% return on investment for building the game that they're making. So right now, what we do know for Remedy is that they're building in their Alan Wake universe, Firebreak, right? Which is apparently is a three person multiplayer game, team based, which it sounds very interesting, right? And it's what's particularly interesting about Firebreak as it's definitely be priced lower than a full fledged like a full price game, right? $60-$70, right? It's gonna be priced lower. And from what's reported, their budget for Firebreak is 30 million and 100% ROI, return on investment, which essentially means that they're able to roughly double their investment to building the game, right? That they anticipate they would have to sell a total of 3 million copies of Firebreak, right? And not within a 1 year time frame, but like over a period of time, maybe 3, 4, 5 years, right? So they're kind of stretching it out, right? And they also mentioned interestingly Control 2. So Control 2 is roughly about $53 million budget, less compared to some other games that we know that came out. Concord, for example, and their 100% return investment requirement is to sell 3 to 4 million copies, right? And what's interesting is that we know that Control One sold 4.5 million copies throughout its life, right? So from the very beginning up until now, and not including, I know that Control One got put into some of these subscription services like Microsoft Game Pass, for example. So that probably increased the player base by how many more millions, right? But what's interesting is you know, for a game like this from Remedy, we know that they're gonna build great stuff, good stuff. Nothing has been bad, maybe except for Quantum Break. I don't know. And but to make money, or at least double their um, the amount of budget they put into both these games, they had to sell quite a bit. And when I look into Alan Wake 2, as of right now, Alan Wake's still fairly new. It was made sometime last year, right?
Yeah.
Early last year. And so far it's sold 1.8 million. So it's still on a pretty good track, but it does still highlights the fact that for a game studio, especially a game studio that's building like a really really high level AAA kind of game, the numbers have to be pretty pretty big for them to make sure that they are in the green, right? So the fact that, for example, Alan Wake 2 sold 1.8 million, right, which means it's getting there. It's great, but it also tells you there's a long way to go to make up those numbers, right, and make sure that they're in the okay. So I'm confident that Remedy will do well. I'm confident that the player base and the awareness of the Alan Wake brand and the Control brand, the whole Alan Wake universe, is strong within the game community. That Remedy will have great success whenever Control 2 comes out. I'm highly looking forward to that. I'm definitely picking up on day one for sure. And Firebreak, I'm kind of curious about that, so we're going to see how that goes. But it just reminded me that, hey, you know what? Even for a company like Remedy, they're watching very closely the numbers to make sure that they aren't going to be put under the red when they build these games. And I definitely hope not. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm hopeful. Another news that also caught my attention is Final Fantasy VII. So what was really interesting to me about Final Fantasy VII news is that they announced they would not be making a DLC after Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Which,
Oh
when I read that,
no.
oh yeah, yeah, I know it's sarcasm, but yeah,
Oh
no,
no.
yeah, no, take that back. But the Final Fantasy VII, it's sad to hear for me. I'm sure many others out there too. But
So,
it's
so
also
sad.
likely,
So
yeah,
sad.
yeah, so, yeah, sure it is. But it definitely is the right decision in hindsight, because one, it already took from Final Fantasy VII Remake to Rebirth. I think it was about roughly a 3 to 4 year time frame, I believe, to launch.
I think it was three
I mean,
years.
yeah, it could be 3 years out. So it's still quite a long time, right? And you know, they did, for between Remake and Rebirth, they did have the Final Fantasy Seven Integrate DLC, which kind of focused on Yuffie's the character in between the story of Remake and Rebirth, which is really good, right? I appreciate that. It definitely kind of helped make the wait for Rebirth a lot more easier. Right, like we still got something, right? Um, but I also understand that a game like Final Fantasy Seven and the ambition and the high standards that they're doing for Final Fantasy Seven is probably really high, and they definitely don't want to mess it up. So, understood and accepted and supported that that to not make a DLC after Final Fantasy Rebirth is sad, but also probably the right choice. And I hope it's the right choice, because there was also the news that Square Enix mentioned that Final Fantasy 16, Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, it sold well. It just didn't sell to what they were expecting. They didn't detail exactly what the expectation was, but it just said that it didn't sell to expectation. So hopefully, you know that that's not any sign of indicator that maybe there's interest waning for Final Fantasy Seven. We want to make sure Final Fantasy Seven, the Part Three, goes out with a bang, and I look forward to it. So, sad news in general overall for me, but just it also just means that the Part Three will come out even faster. How much faster, I don't know, but hopefully faster. Probably 3 years. I hope. Maybe be great if they do less than 3 years, but realistically, it's probably not going to be less than 3 years.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I'm not playing it, but I have been keeping up with the story with like watching other streamers and podcasters like do playthroughs of the Final Fantasy remake series, and so I haven't keeping up the story there. But to my knowledge, there isn't too much to necessarily explore with a DLC for um, Rebirth, right? Like in the first game, there was a lot of mentioning of like Wutai, right? And like Yuffie's clown and all that. And it was always just sort of like in passing, and they're sort of like this big boogeyman, like I don't know, faction within the world. Um, at least for the people living in Midgard, right? And so I feel like with the DLC there, it provided that other perspective, and plus, you were able to introduce a Yuffie into all of that, right? But I feel like with where they end the second game and what we know are going to be like the huge highlights of part three, like I feel like there's not like a clear point to provide DLC. You know what I mean? Like it I feel like you would just want to be all in for the third game at that point.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's kind of hard to tell exactly what they're planning to do. Also, in terms of the story, like how much they're going to change it,
That's
because
true.
because for example, in for the DLC, the integrated DLC involving Yuffie, her storyline in that game was very different from the original, right? Like we would and how she gets introduced to the group and also in Rebirth is also very different too, right? So they could do some changes if they decide to do some changes. I'm sure there will be additional changes to the story. Whether or not that's just a kind of a reimagining of the story or like some kind of parallel universe. Like I know that all that theories out there right now. Um, um, don't know, but they could do something if they decide to change the story. And I think in response to what you're saying, I think it is possible that they could do some kind of story. Like for example, you had Vincent, right? There was a Vincent comes back in Final Seven Rebirth, but you don't play him.
Mm,
Even Sid's back into the story too in Rebirth, but you don't actually play him either. Um, and they just have scenes, so they could probably expand on those two characters, I suppose. But I guess to me that just depends on like how much of a change in their story they want to change and also flesh out during that Final Fantasy Rebirth time
mm,
frame. But yeah, it's it also like to point as you said, the way they ended Rebirth, it just ends it right at a pivotal moment. So I mean, to have a DLC, I suppose it probably would have to just probably expand that rebirth time frame, not go any further
mm,
after. I think
yeah.
if you need one.
So if you had your choice then of like if they were to do a DLC, what what would you want them to do?
You know, I would probably want. I think. Well, I'll put this in two places. I think realistically, probably what the simplest and easiest thing to do would be to do a DLC where it expands their Queen's Blood mini game in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So I don't know if you know, but they have that Queen. They have a kind of a card game mini game in Final Fantasy Rebirth, which is actually pretty good. I mean, I admit I I kind of finished that whole card minigame story, which is actually quite compelling. And you can see that that minigame could be spun off to its own branding. Like it's pretty well fleshed out, you know.
Mm,
So if they ever made a DLC that just maybe added more challenges, or maybe even like a dedicated DLC that just focused on the Queen's Blood mini game, I could see that being a realistic thing to do. Probably it wouldn't take so much effort, so much time to do, and they already have the foundation in there. They just have to kind of add new cards, new challenges, new NPCs to play against. That's probably to me the realistic thing if they did make a DLC to do. What I would have liked to see is, yeah, some kind of like a fleshed out expansion of the story that's maybe not, that could be further fleshed out, whether it's a character insight that we don't know or expansion to a character that we do know in Rebirth. But yeah, yep. Anywho, another 3 years.
All right, so transitioning away from the news, what do you think you're going to be playing moving forward, or what are you currently playing? Especially where we're coming close onto the Thanksgiving holiday, a little bit of free time to go and dabble into a couple things, whether it's games or movies or television or whatnot. So, what are your plans for the holiday?
Yeah, I mean, again, because Thanksgiving season, the whole Black Friday sales going on, a lot of these games that we want to play are on sale for sure. And, I'm always good for good deals, and I do have a huge backlog that I want to play. So right now, I am thinking of two games that I want to play. Either it's Astrobot. I already know that I'm going to enjoy that game. I played like the short game that came included with the PS5. I liked it. I know I'm going to like Astrobot, the full fledged one. But I'm also curious about Star Wars Outlaws. I know the whole news about how the launch wasn't the greatest, and the game kind of got reviewed with like a bit more like mid-ish kind of reviews. But they had the recent 1.4 patch coming out that just made a lot of changes to the game. Don't I've read generally about what the changes that have been made, and they sound good. But then again, I don't have much context that I haven't played it myself, so I don't know if it really does make things better or not. But the fact that they have the 1.4 patch coming out, and also, you know, from what I just saw before this week, before us talking, it's $40 for Star Wars Outlaws. That's a pretty good deal compared to, I think it's 70 for full
Mm.
price. That's a pretty good deal. So I'm either trying to jump between Astrobot or Star Wars Outlaws. Um, be playing either one of those two, or if not both, during the cold season. How about you?
So I just finished a one of the character storylines in Star Wars: The Old Republic. I've been playing that on the Steam Deck, which I'm really pleased that I was able to get it to run. Uh, I know when I was like on Reddit and stuff, people were saying that technically you can play Star Wars: Old Republic on Steam Deck, but the main issue with that game is the controls and like mapping all the keys. And when I first started, for like 2 weeks, I like kept reinstalling that game and like trying out a different controller scheme, and it just like did not feel right. And so last weekend, I actually spent like a few hours just sitting down and like creating a mapping scheme for myself that I felt could work. And you know what? It was totally fine. I mean, yes, it took a while to map everything out, but now that game feels really good in hand. And so, that's going back to a world I love, going back to, or like, and a pretty robust world that has a whole lot of content, which, I did pay for premium a little while back, but never really got to utilize it. And so kind of going back to like utilizing all these perks has been super nice. But yeah, right now, in terms of the original storyline, I still have 4 different characters I have to play through. So, which each run I think is like 40 hours or so. So that's a whole lot of content right there. But I've been whenever I play this game, I do take breaks pretty often. So I'm probably gonna splice that in with a couple of other Steam sales that are coming up. I know that's gonna happen in a few days or so. So my wallet is preparing for that. But I did give myself a budget of $100. That's it. Which $100 on Steam sales, that can really go a long way. But I decided to give myself that in the event that I decide to buy something new. at like almost full price, or if it's only like discounted like 10% or something like that. I did hear that the new Dragon Age Veilguard can run on the Steam Deck, so I am pretty intrigued to hop into that, but not sure if I'm necessarily going to pull the trigger. But with the budget I provided myself, I'm giving myself that option. Actually, just before hopping onto here, I saw a sale that was happening pre official Steam sale, and so I decided to pick up a couple things for about $10 or so. So I'm already digging into my budget, but I'm trying to hold fast to that, just because I don't want to have a huge backlog, and I still have Star Wars Old Republic, which is just a lot of game that's technically totally free. So I think I'm going to be entertained for a long time. In any case, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there for tonight. So, like always, like, comment, subscribe down below. Thanks for hanging out this evening. But until next time, goodbye.